Those who had arrested Jesus, as it says in verse 57, led him away to Caiaphas, the high priest, where the scribes and the elders had convened. You see, this was actually highly irregular. In fact, going above and beyond that, this was actually illegal. After his arrest, Jesus should have been held until his trial could have been held in a public and legal manner. The Mishnah, which is a book secondary to the Scriptures that contained certain laws and ordinances, stated that the Sanhedrin could not hold a council at night or during a festival. The Gospel of Luke states that they did wait until morning for this, but the way that Matthew and Mark put it says they did not. Either way, this was at the time of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. They had no legal right to even bring him to court. But because they wanted to be punished so bad, because they had heard the things he had said about them, and they were afraid that the people believed in him, and they didn't want the people to know about this trial, they held it either in the middle of the night or very early in the morning. Verse 58 says this: Meanwhile, Peter was following him at a distance, right to the high priest's courtyard. He went in and was sitting with the temple police to see the outcome. Peter was able to observe these events from a distance, which is probably one of the main reasons we have these records in the Gospels, because you see, the Sanhedrin itself would not have given us such records. They would have wanted us to think that this trial went down exactly as a trial was supposed to go down. But we're going to see more and more that this is not the case. Verse 59 then says, the chief priests and the whole Sanhedrin were looking for false testimony against Jesus so they could put him to death. But they could not find any, even though many false witnesses came forward. Finally, 2 who came forward stated, this man said, I can demolish God's sanctuary and rebuild it in 3 days. Jesus was a righteous man, so of course they couldn't find anything substantial to charge him for. So they charged him for something that he had taught openly, but they charged him in secret. Verse 62 says, the high priest then stood up and said to him, don't you have an answer to what these men are testifying against you? After the charge was brought forward, which as I said is a charge that was true, but he openly taught this in the temple after he had criticized the merchants. You can find that in the Gospel of John chapter 2. They asked Jesus to answer, but he remained silent because he had already said this. They were trying to twist his words and use them against him, and he had nothing left to say to them. But in verse 63 says, but Jesus kept silent. Then the high priest said to him, by the living God I place you under oath. Tell us if you are the Messiah, the Son of God. Now Jesus was a righteous man. So if they had made him take this oath, he's going to have to do it. And so Jesus replies, you have said it, Jesus told him. But I tell you, you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of the power and coming on the clouds of heaven. Jesus answered truthfully. He says, it's absolutely as you say, and you're going to see this one of these days. You will see me seated next to my Father. Then the high priest, in the next verse, says, tore his robes and said, he has blasphemed. Why do we still need witnesses? Look, now you've heard the blasphemy. What is your decision? This broke the law in another couple of ways. First of all, according to the book of Leviticus in chapter 21, verse 10, the high priest was never to tear his garments. Secondly, coming back to the Mishnah, a verdict was never supposed to be given in a single day. A trial was to take at least 2 days, and the defense had to have an opportunity to give a formal defense. But the high priest here calls for an immediate verdict. They answered, he deserves death. Then they spit in his face and beat him. Others slapped him and said, prophesy to us, Messiah. Who hit you?